I think that there is some value to this, right? Like I think that there is value to critical theory. I think that there's value to naming power relations. I think that the problem is when everything is either when we understand all issues as either nothing or everything. Either you never talk about race or you only talk about racism, right? And so that's how I understand this kind of approach to oppressed and oppressor, that understanding of diversity work. So I'll offer a personal example. So, you know, on occasion over the past couple of years, my kids have come home and they've said that, you know, a camp counselor or a teacher has asked them how they feel oppressed as a Muslim, right? How Islamophobia has affected them. And on the one hand, I appreciate that because Islamophobia exists. And I got to tell you, like my kids have grown up being called names on the playground and having their faith made fun of. And that is an ugly thing. It's not a pogrom, right? It's not the end of the world, but it is an ugly thing and it shouldn't exist. And yet something bothers me in the way the question is posed. It is as if it is Islamophobia that makes Islam important. And in my mind, that kind of construction is enormously important, right? Because the notion is your identity has no content unless somebody else is prejudiced against it or opposing it or discriminating against it. And the truth is, Islam has a lot of content, and every identity has a lot of content. And I would much rather my kids be approached vis-a-vis their Muslim identity about how it inspires them to be better people, how it inspires them to contribute to the society, how it inspires them to serve others. In other words, what is the contribution that their identity inspires them to make? And this is why I talk about America not as a melting pot, but as a potluck supper. And the central thing about a potluck supper is that people have to bring a contribution. That's how I understand diverse identities. It is part of your contribution to society. It's part of what makes you you. It's part of your dignity. It's part of your identity, but it's part of your contribution to society. And I think a major problem with the oppressor-oppressed approach. I mean, one problem is, you know, it's so hard to designate who the oppressed and the oppressor are. How do you take into account somebody's level of education? How do you take into account whether somebody's parents love them? How do you take into account how people are kind of wired as part of their attitude, right? It's just impossible to assign power relations or oppressor-oppressed based only on race, gender, sexuality, et cetera. But I think the biggest problem with it is that it assumes that identities don't have content, that they are made important by somebody else's prejudice. And I just think that is a deep, deep violation of every identity.